Let's talk about the new Russian propaganda operation. Yeah, I need to talk about this because, to be frank, it's pretty blatant that the Russians are trying to redouble their efforts to reach the Western conservatives. Now, most of this effort seems to be focused on the United States. We're headed towards a midterm election in the United States. Media political coverage is heightening. The results of the midterms could affect whether or not there is a sizable aid package that could be brought to the House floor without a discharge petition vote, meaning you wouldn't be going around the Speaker of the House if Democrats took back the House, and then you could send that vote to the Senate, and depending on who controls the Senate and depending on who is in control of the Senate leadership, that bill is then brought to the Senate floor, voted on. Whether it has a veto-proof majority, that could be dependent upon those conditions, and then that could even sidestep in 2027 whether or not Trump is president or not. Now, there's going to be a vote in the Senate. They'll likely vote yes. There'll be the Support Ukraine Act will go to Trump's desk, and I think he will likely veto it. There's a small chance, depending upon if they want to really try to compel the Russians before the midterm elections to come to the negotiation table, that there actually is some untapped reserves that the United States can bring to the table, change the equation, and make it more difficult for the Russians, unless Marco Rubio is in the White House doing like debate jujitsu, like now that Tulsi is gone, and it's just gonna be like Marco and JD, and Trump goes with Marco. In that scenario, maybe, but I think that is unlikely. But regardless, the midterms could mean something different down the line. I always thought after midterms, that would be the best chance for Ukraine aid getting through in the first place, right? So I think that both for that reason, Russia's long-term standing in the United States, immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Thank you, Durag, for the tier 1 sub, being sub for 3 years. 3 years of supporting this morally corrupt, bankrupt man. I appreciate that. But they want to change America's long-term view of Russia, which is largely negative. They want to make an alliance with parts of the American extremes, which includes the American right, and they want to compromise America's ability to support Ukraine in the short term, as the Russians are running into enough problems with Ukraine's long-range missile program, with the mid-range strike program, which is complicating their logistics in the south, with their manpower loss and the difficulty at which they have to expend high budget requirements for the military contracts when it comes to actually, paying out those big amounts to get people to the front line. And so they want to make sure the United States, but also the Western world at large, but most important in the shorthand, the United States, where they've had the most success, doesn't support Ukraine. And so they have called upon 2 figures. Well, 3, but we're going to start with the American ones first. The first one is Candace Owens. So Candace Owens went over to Russia, and she started posing in front of big Russian monuments, posing inside of Russian churches, posing inside of the most clean and pristine locations across Russia, not showing what the average Russian sees in their neighborhood, but the nicer parts of Russia. Look, there are nice parts of Russia. If you pretend that's all of Russia and then use that as your starting line for what all of Russia looks like, and then compares that to all of the United States, then you can get takes like, hey, this subway right here in this specific spot, if you don't go like 2 stations over, do you see the drug peddler? Look, but if you look at this specific side, it looks nice. Why can't the worst part of LA look like that? Why can't, Skid Row exists, but in this Russian subway station, and that's what you got with Tucker Carlson style content. And that's what you started to get a little bit, not to the same extreme where Tucker Carlson added the scary music and he did the diatribe directly into the camera, but she started doing this with images. And then she started doing this in Russian state media, Russian-aligned media, where she started giving quick interviews about how glorious Russia was, how she hopes that more Americans come to Russia, how, her preconceptions about Russia are being destroyed, that this is a deeply religious and moral country. And then she would go while doing her Candace show and speak to these different Russian philosophers who would tell her, philosophers is really like pumping it up a bit, who would tell her any number of things to, you know, amaze her, including this fairy tale from one Russian man who just, you know, just wandered onto screen, and that tells her of the heroics of Putin's family. Russia takes time to talk about and understand. You know, let me tell you a story about Putin's grandfather. He told it to me himself. He fought in the First World War on the Austrian front. And he looked over the parapet and saw an Austrian taking aim at him. And he was able to shoot first. He wounded that Austrian. Then he was sitting in his trench and he could hear him groaning. The man was in pain. He was wounded. He sat there listening. He waited until nightfall, climbed over the parapet, crawled over to the Austrian, and bandaged his wound with his own field dressing. Then he returned to his trench without being seen, so that they wouldn't shoot him for treason. Can you even name one soldier in any army in the world that would have done that? That's a Russian for you. Mind you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, of course, really takes it to heart there. Mind you, we have tons of footage from this war of Russians executing POWs. Like I mean, we could make a compilation that could like 30 minutes on this channel of just Russians, just the footage that is publicly available. Not even of the corpses recovered afterward, but just of the drone footage from the most transparent war in human history of just Russians just bam, 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 shooting Ukrainians that have surrendered. I mean, it's much more common that if you hear that groaning from a trench dig, you go over, shoot them. You go over, throw a grenade. That is much more common, much more likely. And I have a very hard time believing this fairy tale. It's not that it's impossible that somebody can show that type of kindness, but when somebody does show that type of kindness in war, it's usually the stuff of blockbuster films, not usually the lineage of a brutal dictator. Now, Candace Owens, I mean, there's a lot of stuff from Candace. I don't think it's super important that we go through all of it. We'll go through a little bit more. Here is her talking about the need for Americans to come and visit Russia, because we can learn from them that really it's not their society that's in decline. It's our society that's in decline. And you can see this has been published by Russian state media. They're using Candace Owens, publishing her views to try to prop up Russia. They're using her as a propaganda tool. That's why she's being shown around all these places so easily. It's not like she filed as a journalist. It's like, I would like to view these places very nicely. Could you just so happen? No, they have a whole agenda set out for her in advance.
I encourage literally every person in the world to visit Russia. Apply for a visa. You actually are allowed to do that, Dana. Go see the Kremlin Museum. You will be spiritually moved by Russia. Everything, and I mean everything that we have been told about Russia is a lie, okay? So when Tucker Carlson was going around looking at the grocery stores, that was not propaganda. That is real. Like I said, an entire...
Mind you, Tucker Carlson was listing the prices from the grocery store and comparing it to an American grocery bill, when the amount that a Russian would get paid per month is obviously extremely different. And so he was saying, oh my gosh, look how little they pay compared to us. Maybe all that talk of freedom is also some bullshit, which is the way he was pitching it. And when you actually looked at like what the bill was, that's like on average like 30 to 40% of like a Russian salary. It was like actually a sizable portion of our average Russian salary. It's just Tucker Carlson was thinking from, you know, he's a Swanson family, a silver spoon boy.
Black-pilled Kiwi has donated $5. Can you blame her, Dylan? If you look so much like a fish, you're bound to act like one and swallow the bait. Hook, line, and sinker.
I mean, thank you for the $5. I get it, Black Pill, but he was walking around grabbing bread and sniffing it through the plastic and talking about how beautiful and great and high quality it was. It was so manufactured. He had a dance that he wanted to do in advance, and then he did that dance when he was in Russia. You do not sniff bread through plastic. It was choreographed to a comedic extent. So yes, it was propaganda.
At the grocery stores, that was not propaganda. That is real. Like I said,
and again, I don't know why that is like oh my God, they have they have grocery stores. Nobody said the Russians were starving. Now this is why when you listen to Ilhan Omar, like, oh my God, can you Can we really wage economic warfare on the Russians? What is economic warfare on the Russians? You mean making it harder for Gazprom and Rosneft, which is funding the war effort and have their own private military companies, fighting in Ukraine, making it more difficult for them to do business? We're not saying no bread is illegal. No bread to Russia. Like, nobody is doing that. The Russians are not starving. It's more expensive to live in Russia now. It's more expensive. But nobody ever said that there was no bread in the grocery stores.
Entire Catholic family moved there from Iowa. And I asked them blankly, is this just in Moscow? They live an hour and a half outside. No, this is one of the most amazing things is how cheap the food is, how healthy the food is, that every place is like Whole Foods.
Every place is like Whole Foods. Every place is like Whole Foods. It sounds like the type of thing you'd be told from a government-sponsored tour.
Particularly pointed out the grocery stores, but I don't want you to take it from me. I don't want you to take it from Tucker Carlson. I want you to go for yourself.
I don't think they'll let me.
I want you to use your own eyes, and I want you to believe your own eyes.
I'd go to Sudza again if we made another trip.
Takeaway from visiting Russia is that it is our society that is on the decline, not theirs. Russia, like I said, has not been communist in over 30 years. What about us? Pornography, welfarism, nonstop war, debt.
The lack of self-awareness. Okay, so smut. We have smut in America. That's where she starts with. We have smut. Oh, Playboy and the Hub and X Video. Oh my God. Rule 34 and all the forms and oh my God. Can you believe Russia is a factory for that type of content? I don't want to get too into it, but I mean, like, this type of trafficking has been a problem both in Ukraine and Russia, but also like the production of that type of material. Yeah, it has been produced there. In fact, the possession of child abuse material is not illegal in Russia. Distribution, yes, illegal. Selling, very illegal. Possession, not illegal. Now, people can debate this and say, well, when somebody's distributing it, they get charged in this way, and they'll still go to, well, if somebody's selling it, yeah, that's true. But when it comes to possession, not illegal. And so if the government was to find you had files on your hard drive that was not being distributed, that you were not sending to other accounts, that you were not like putting on SD cards and like selling out somewhere, I don't know how, I have no clue how it works. Or if you were going, you were not selling it on some online market, that in and of itself is not enough to charge you. And that's the laws currently on the books in Russia. And of course, if you're connected and you get caught up in this type of stuff, they're not going to fight to try to find some other way to charge you. As, maybe they try to do it to say, oh, well, maybe if we look really hard, we can find a distribution charge. So, I mean, there's still a center of production. I mean, it's not like the type of crimes in this industry in Russia. There's no history there. And possession is not even inherently illegal. So I would say the smut category, I don't know if Russia really beats us out on the degeneracy angle. She said debt. Russia is giving up its strategic gold reserves and putting it on planes and shipping it around the world to sell it in order to fund this war. Russia got a lifeline in the sanctions exemptions, filling in $250 million more a year that went where? Not to the benefit of its own people, but to a war effort that is further crashing its demographics that before the war was already of concern to even the Russian government. Listen to the Russian government before the war and how they talked about Russia's demographics and how they had to raise the birth rate. You know what the Russian invasion of Ukraine did not do? It did not lead to a gigantic population boom. You want to know what the Russian invasion did not do? It did not lead to a lot of people, a lot of women getting pregnant and having more kids. Do you know what the Russian invasion of Ukraine did not do? It did not make it so that less people had, needed government subsidy, needed government disability. It certainly put more people on the government dime, not only during the war, but after the war. For those who get disabled, for those who get PTSD, they're making long-term health care requirements that they're going to have to service for the rest of these people's lives in the largest scale war Russia has engaged in since the Second World War. And what are they going to be able to get from these occupied territories? There's no money to be extracted from these occupied territories besides, stolen grain, really. So it's not like they're going to be able to reap enough benefit from occupied territories to even necessarily pay off the debts they've incurred for this war. That's not even to talk about the geopolitical debts that they've incurred to the North Koreans, or the debts that they've inevitably had to incur with the Chinese, or the lower prices that they've had to sell their energy product at, and the monetary value that they've lost out on due to this war. So when we talk about debting themselves, I mean, the Russians, if the path that they're taking is continuously the path that they're going down, the debt situation for the Russians will only continuously get worse. When it comes to endless war, I mean, I don't know how to be... I mean, that's kind of so too on the nose to even say anything, isn't it?
People telling us that this is freedom, right? This is great. This is you being free. You wouldn't want to live in Russia. That's the boogeyman syndrome, right? They're comparing it to something that you've never seen so that you don't, riot in the streets, demanding change, recognizing that we are actually being stolen from. Our inheritance is being stolen from. And these people are growing increasingly dangerous in their demands, increasingly.
When we talk about our inheritance is being stolen from, Russia's old Soviet reserve of armored vehicles, has burnt out in Ukraine. They've spent so much money that should be going to elderly people's pensions, rebuilding Russian schools, investment in Russian infrastructure. I mean, hell, money that they're going to need later for the treatment of their own wounded soldiers. When we talk about selling out your country, selling out your future, why is Russia the model to follow? The biggest killer of Christians on the planet.
Communists in our demands. They want to control our words, to control our thoughts, to punish us, tagging the U.S. Treasury. They want me to go to prison for going to Russia on a family vacation.
A family vacation, but I do radio appearances. Family vacation, but I post literally every single step on social media, and I make it super political undertones. Family vacation, but I come back and all I talk about is the political conclusions that I came to. Family vacation, but the whole time I spent it talking family vacation. Okay, you want to know when I have a family vacation and I go somewhere Ocean City, Maryland, I don't leave there guys, I have some radical conclusions about seagulls. I go there and I relax. Family vacation, please. Anyway, that was the first stage of this new propaganda operation by the Russians. Here's the second stage. Andrew Tate joins the Russian army. Wow, that's not good to listen to. By the way, the fact it's the AK-74U. The AK-74U, the worst of all of the AK models. Sorry, I just thought that was interesting. Not to mention the fact that if you look at this, you can also clearly see that they're not wearing any plates. It's the performative plate carrier, whatever. Who doesn't like a performative plate carrier? Bring it to a protest, bring it to a war, bring it to a training ground, bring it wherever. Anyway, you can see them all dancing around on all this military gear, making a show of it. They have 7 minutes online you can view of the Tate brothers just basically playing with military gear in military camo with the Russian army after they were welcomed at the airport by a Russian cultural delegation singing folk music, doing folk dances, then brought them to all of these different facilities where they got to meet different people for their scheduled government tour. both in the military, but also like to different big cultural sites, churches, and the like. And while here you can see the Russian army interacting with the Tate brothers as they get to see those who are engaged in the largest scale war in Europe since World War II, killing the most Christians in Europe, killing the most Europeans in Europe, killing the most Christians of any war on the planet, actually. We see these based and trad people going and dancing around with these people in military camouflage, playing toy soldier in order to look more based, trad, and get to play with the big military toys. They service their propaganda, and they get to service their, their pension for wanting to go out there and feel like a big man. And camo makes a lot of men feel very, very big. Well, anyway, after that, you could see a lot of this, of them going around and training with the, look how cool they are. They're doing their squats. See how cool they are? He's got a cigar in his mouth and he's doing squats. Well, anyway, I thought this was fascinating on a few accounts. Number one, it's fascinating because this type of stuff with the Russian army was likely organized by the Russian government, obviously. And so they think that Andrew Tate is the type of message that can bring Russian power and the Russian bear to the international, I think, both youth, young people, but also like the kind of, mogging, like red pill audiences that even if they've lost some influence, still exists. I mean, look at the audience that Andrew Tate attracted when he went to Moscow. Look at these people. Not a single one of them is over the age of 20.
Where are we going?
Every single one of them are children. Every single one of these people are not old enough to serve in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this is Andrew Tate gets swarmed by Russian fans. By the way, this is not where getting swarmed is. I think some people forget what Michael Jackson, the Beatles, what like real megastar, what getting swarmed look like. This is not getting swarmed. This is having an interaction with like not even like a dozen fans, right? Okay. I also saw the same caption put on him meeting two people. He gets swarmed by fans. I think we're just forgetting what the English language is. But this is the crowd that they want to reach both in Russia, because they know that Andrew Tate has propaganda value in Russia, because there are Russians who, have been appealed to by the red pill stuff, but also, and I think this is important more for Americans, but also American young people trying to make American kids think Russia is based, trad, and cool, and, everything they're doing is just them being based and awesome. And that it's America that is actually woke and dumb, and we're just destroying ourselves while Russia is bringing in a new age. At the same time, the Russian State Duma MPs are so embarrassing that they're cutting the mic as they call for global thermonuclear war because the war isn't going fast enough, and even they can see it, so they have to get even crazier to make up for it. As we all remember, Zelensky's criminal regime, steeped in Russophobia and anti-communism, under the patronage of the European Union, attacked our homeland with the aim of establishing a gangster-led neo-Nazi Bandera regime. It's the idea of the Ukrainians invading Russia to put a Banderite-style government in Moscow. That's a fascinating alternative history scenario. This is why our president, Vladimir Putin, was forced to launch the special military operation. Unfortunately, however, things didn't go as planned. That's why I think that our MPs should appeal to the Russian president to authorize the use of nuclear weapons and strike at the supporters of Bandera. And that will lead the Ukrainian leadership to sign peace agreements and bring an end to the SMO. And then they cut him off because that's a little too crazy even for them. Even for them, it's a little too crazy. But for Tate, nah, that's based, that's cool. Russia has a masculine population.
In countries which are very patriotic, even Russia, for example, and I'll make this clear, I'm a born American, my father served, I am an...
By the way, that guy on the right, Russian state propagandist, Russian state propaganda network, Russian state media.
American. I love America. I'm unhappy with a lot of their policies and a lot of the things they're doing, but I'm an American.
Yeah, me
and
too.
This is my first time in Russia and I'm visiting, but you see that Russia is a very patriotic nation and they don't fear having a masculine population because masculinity and patriotism go hand in hand. And Russia, to a degree, is a sovereign state where you know that if you have patriotic masculine men, you're going to protect Russia. But the problem is that a lot of other Western countries across
Unless granddad, says invade a country and destroy your demographics, then those masculine men will go along with it. We'll go along with it all the way. I mean, like, if what they have to do is kill other people, then they'll do it. If what they have to do is challenge internal corruption, challenge their own leadership, well, that's a complicated question.
The entire globe now is that if you have patriotic masculine men, they're going to look around and realize that their country's bought and sold, that it's all international finance, that it's all the Wall Street bankers and BlackRock.
And where you look in Russia, everything's owned by mom and pop. In Russia, everything's income inequality is a thing of the past. In Russia, nothing's owned by oligarchs. Politics is really grassroots in Russia. I mean, come on.
And all these hedge funds, and they're going to say, you know what, we're going to stop this gravy train.
Well, so you have masculine Russia and not masculine, but more Christian United States, apparently. We're bought and sold, but they're not because BlackRock.
And we want to take our...
I mean, bought and sold by who? What's so special about BlackRock that makes oligarch ownership less bad?
Our country back. And that is why they try their very best to prevent masculinity and prevent patriotism. The two things that you think a country would want to protect itself. In these Western countries, especially in Europe, they prevent that specifically because it would end the gravy train of these international bankers, which are just living off of the trading of currencies and doing no work and enjoying a great...
They don't want you having high testosterone in Europe because then the bankers would get mad. Thank you, Andrew Tate, for your esteemed social commentary. It's very useful. It is for comments like that the Ukrainian Armed Forces was added and emailed and requested many times saying, hey, Andrew Tate is in Russian camouflage. Hey, Andrew Tate is on a Russian tank. Hey, Andrew Tate is firing Russian weapons. Hey, Andrew Tate is at a Russian training field. Hey, Andrew Tate is next to Russian soldiers. Hey, Andrew Tate is being transported around in a Russian military vehicle. Why can't you? Why not? And so as the Ukrainian Armed Forces was asked to blow up Andrew Tate, they responded, sorry. It was like they were actually saying sorry, we can't do that. Oops. And okay, fellas, we all see your tags and we get it. But being a bad person doesn't make someone a legitimate military target under international law. Climbing on a tank for internet clout isn't enough to become a combatant. Do something that actually qualifies, then we can talk. Until then, we'll keep our drones for real military targets. Welcome to the 21st century, where the Ukrainian government has to say, sorry, we will not blow up Andrew Tate for now. The last one I wanted to tell you, oh, by the way, Andrew Tate talked a lot about historical architecture in a lot of his posts, where he poses next to Russian cities, and he talks about how, in the modern world, nobody appreciates, the architecture and history that goes into these types of buildings. And then at the same day that he's making those posts, this is what Russian state TV is broadcasting about Odessa, a city that the Russians view paternally, that even these propagandists view paternally, and whose architecture is absolutely beautiful, built by French, Russian, Ukrainian, and Italian architects, of course, the Odessa Opera House of extreme beauty. Here is the top Russian state propagandist talking about the need to purify the city with fire, full quote. Odessa is a Russian city.
Серьезно?
Really?
Одесса,
Odessa is a city
который
that the
русские
Russians
построили.
built.
На Одессу город,
But Odessa is a city that
обесчестил себя.
Oh, 1 second. There's a city that has brought shame upon itself. May 2014. From that moment, they're talking about a moment where basically, while there were a bunch of different, you can call them like spontaneous militias, organized militias, groupings of people with guns, Molotovs, and knives and bats tried to take over buildings across Ukraine in different areas to try to set up people's republics. It only succeeded in 2 locations, Donetsk and Luhansk. They tried in Kharkiv, they tried in Odessa, they tried in a lot of different places. In Odessa, after street violence, some of these people holed up in Odessan like Union building, and then the building burnt down. Now the question of whether or not the Ukrainians on the outside burnt it down or the people on the inside burnt it down is still disputed. We know that there were people who were with the pro-Russian forces on the inside had Molotov cocktails, and the possibility of one of them dropping a Molotov or going to throw it out of a window and missing and like hitting something, like that's a possibility, but we simply do not know. And follow-up investigations have not been, we'll just say vigorous in finding out what the full like picture is. But it's not like, they've herded a bunch of people into this Union building, burnt it down with everybody else inside. There was violence that preceded that, and of course there was a lot of violence that followed that, and the moment itself is quite murky. But he is saying because of that murky moment, all of Odessa kind of decided its fate at that moment. And from that moment on, the history of Russian Odessa has been overshadowed by a history of endless betrayal, in which people from Odessa are also taking part. There are those who are brave and take up arms to fight, like Igor Markov. And then there are those who have come here and are all grumbling, scribbling something. There are those who have seemed to have been condemned over there, yet here they haven't gone up to take arms to defend their homeland and recapture Odessa. All they do is shoot things. In fact, they've teamed up with Matyan, and who's know what the 2 of them are up to over there. Come to think of it, it's also a memory why there aren't dead and behind bars right now. No, I don't expect Odessa to return. I think it should be purified by fire. Then we'll rebuild it. That's what I think. Don't wait for them to come back and don't fight them. So what? What are you talking about? There are people. They killed our people there in May of 2014. And they continued to kill. Our people aren't there anymore. Don't go looking for our people where they aren't. Don't fight as if it were us. It's as if we were about to wake up and come back. They are our enemies. So he's saying that anybody that was, really Russian, they died in 2014 or they've subsequently left. And so the Ukrainians that are left in Odessa are the ones who have decided to not pick up arms and fight their neighbors, or those who have decided not to collaborate, even though there are collaborators in occupied Odessa, occupied regions and Odessa itself. And those in Odessa have, in many instances, shown that they want to stay part of Ukraine, which is the majority of people. So there is no need for them to hold back in their bombing because they're not ours. And you could hear the difference in how they talk about the protections of civilians when it comes to Ukrainians. And not only are they not ours, but then we can purify the city by fire. Of course, firebombing and burning down all these cities will kill a lot of civilians, and that is disastrous, but it will also destroy the architecture that these commentators went on and on and on and on, and oh, these buildings were built by Russian architects, or oh, these buildings, these plots were at least planned by Russian designers and Russian, this is a Russian city. We need to get back our Russian communities. We need to get back our Russian this, Russian that, Russian buildings. And then immediately, once the war does not go their way, burn it all to the ground. If we can't have it, no one can have it. What a paternal view. In fact, it is a paternal view. Not that it's actually paternal, but it is a paternal view, but it is an abusive paternal view. If you don't become the thing that I want you to become, for my expense, for my interests, for my world, then you cannot exist or have your world at all. Very interesting. This is the beautiful history preserving Russian government and Russian state media apparatus. And let's go to the last operation, the last Russian op, and that is Tommy Robinson, who when he came to the United States was being like weirdly rude to pro-Ukraine demonstrators who just peacefully and quietly just holding Ukrainian flags in Washington, D.C. Here is the message he sends over to the Russian Federation, engaged in the largest war, killing Christians and white people in all of Europe, and this nationalist seems to be all on board with the killing of Christians and whites. I mean, at least aligned with the forces that do it. Here is him posting a video of Russian nationalists paying their respect to Henry Nowak. Henry Nowak was a British national that was killed, and the police let him bleed out as they investigated a crime, and the man who killed him was not a white man. He was a Sikh, and he as it has inspired a lot of anger, a lot of division in the United Kingdom, and so he is accepting thanks from Russian patriots, British Union Jack shaking, Russian trident, Russian tricolor.
We, the Russian nationalists, would like to commemorate Henry Nowak, who was viciously murdered this week by the hands of a Sikh immigrant who is a vile infiltrator of the English land. But that's not it. Under the cold ignorance of a British...
Maybe a seizure warning would have helped.
Police.
A little much, honestly. It's a bit distracting from what he's trying to actually say.
Poor 18-year-old boy bled to death instead of receiving first aid. This boy is a representation of all white European Christian people, young men, fathers, sons, their families, their sisters. They're all under the threat of a mass invasion by a foreign foe, an enemy who does not care, who does not respect our rights.
Look, I mean, it's really hard for me to take any Russian nationalist serious. Their country is right now, I mean, you're talking about it from a migrant perspective. North Korean migrants, Central Asian migrants, their labor population is strained, and so they're relying on a lot of migrants. This is creating a lot of social tension, and it's something that Russia's probably going to have to reckon with in the long run. Russia has a very low church attendance rate and is rapidly becoming more Muslim. Some demographic estimations put it that Russia will become 1/3 Muslim by 2040, 2050. Now, I'm not saying that, like, this is even necessarily anything that inspires my outrage or attention, but for groups like this, the focus is interesting. Also, considering the fact that continuously throwing Russia's men into the Ukrainian, wood chipper, as it is for Russian manpower at the moment, that isn't helping your demographics, and taking all this money that could be spent on maintaining and fostering the future of Russia's demographics, or the future of Russia as a nation, and slamming it into Ukraine, again, is not helping very much. They're killing the most Christians on the planet. They're killing the most Europeans on the planet. They're killing the most Russians on this planet. They're killing the most Russian speakers on the planet. And instead, they're focusing on these individual criminal murder cases in the United Kingdom. It's not that Henry Nowak's cases does not matter. It's just when it comes to, like, the perspective from inside Russia, I mean, they can throw their solidarity whatever way they want to. There are bigger fish to fry, and when it comes to what Tommy Robinson doesn't talk about for what Russia is doing to Europe in its modern age, the invaders. Yeah, I see a lot of invaders too, and they're Russians. And so it's very interesting when we talk about invasions of Europe. There's one invasion that doesn't seem to get any attention from Tommy Robinson. Anyway, the Russians are engaged in a new propaganda operation. These are just some of their operatives. These are just some of the people that they are using to channel their operation, their information operation. Andrew Tate, Candace Owens, Tommy Robinson, people on the right political extremes. It's not that they never touch the left of political extremes. It's just that as a much more beneficial and fertile ground for exploitation by the Russians in the moment. And Candace Owens and Andrew Tate bit very hard on that hook.